These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Stuskit, and thank you very much for joining us today here on Market Journal. There's a lot of things happening around the Nebraska ag industry right now. Southern rust has made an early appearance this summer. We'll learn more with Extension Plant Pathologist Tamra Jackson-Ziems. The latest cattle on feed report came out from USDA. Elliott Dennis from the university will join us later in the show to break down all that's happening in the cattle markets. That's straight ahead on the show, but we'll begin here. As crops grow taller and the season matures, it's not uncommon to see low-flying airplanes dive and rise all over the landscape. Those aerial applicators help apply products to protect and manage plants, doing it faster and on a larger scale than ground-based sprayers can. To make sure those planes are achieving efficient and uniform operations, a group called SAFE helps test planes across the U.S. SAFE stands for Self-Regulating Application and Flight Efficiency. For today's In the Field update, we have a Market Journal throwback as we learn how these planes are calibrated ahead of the spraying season.
Actually, we read it through a spectrometer, and the actual pattern data that comes out, it will come close to pretty much showing you exactly where every drop hit within that pattern. From one end of the pattern, one side of the pattern to the other side of the pattern. And what we look for is, number one, a consistent low area or high spot where there's under application or over application going on within that pattern itself. Now, every pass is going to be a little bit different because of all the different variables that there are in aerial spraying. However, if we consistently see a low spot, a high spot, or some issue, that means that we need to make some adjustments to that equipment to fill in those spots or to reduce those high spots and make it a much more even pattern.
For a farmer out there, can you explain maybe the bigger differences between a land application and an aerial application?
Well, an aerial application obviously is a much quicker operation. Aerial application, they can work when ground applications sometimes can't. Other issues might be, crop height, obviously. Ground application is going to be, a little less expensive. However, when, and I see it all the time driving down the highway where they use ground application on crops that have been drilled, you obviously have a yield loss there. And that yield loss most likely would more than pay for the application and the product by doing it with the aerial sprayer.
So what's the participation level in Operation SAFE?
Well, within the United States, they do have a fair participation rate. I've been to a lot of other states as far as helping out with fly-ins and conducting fly-ins there. Some states it's a requirement. People go have their plane tested, just do a set of 3 or 4 passes just to satisfy that requirement.
Allen says there's been good participation in this testing program here in Nebraska. He added that the pilots are avid about doing the proper job for producers as well as protecting the environment. Up next, the 24th Annual Nebraska Grazing Conference is coming up August 6th and 7th in Kearney. This conference is designed for those interested in the utilization and conservation of grazing lands. Attendees will learn the most current information about grazing livestock systems as well as their impact on the grazing lands. Alex Makovica brings us the details.
Beginning and experienced grazers, land managers, and policymakers can all benefit from attending the event. While the focus is on Nebraska, the information shared at the event is applicable beyond the state's borders.
The conference has, over the years, attracted a pretty good following in terms of people that have come and attended it each year. And I think each year we've tried to provide something that's a little bit different and informative to livestock producers. And I think this year with that emphasis on soil health on the first day, and then on the second day, where we're going to have that wildlife and private grasslands focus or theme, the speakers there will, I think, have some pretty good ideas related to wildlife management on private lands and how people or landowners might be able to use that as another income opportunity on their place.
The Nebraska Grazing Conference Planning Committee is comprised of people involved in the state's grazing livestock industry, public and private sector educators, and land managers. Each year, the committee uses the suggestions from conference evaluations to bring in speakers of interest to attendees. That helps make the topics current and relevant.
First day will be focused on soil health and just grassland soils in general. And then on the second day, we'll be covering some things related to wildlife on grasslands. On Tuesday morning, starting at about 9 o'clock, we're going to be at the Platte River Prairies, which is located just south of Wood River. And this is some property owned by the Nature Conservancy. And what we will be doing there is having some soil pits where attendees to the tour can actually have a full depth or profile look at some different soils, and we'll have some experts in that area talking about the soils and actually some of the things that they might do if they were doing a soil judging activity.
This year's grazing conference will be happening August 6th and 7th. The event will kick off with a field tour in the morning at the Nature Conservancy at Platte River Prairies near Wood River. The indoor portions of the event will be held at the Unis Conference Center in Kearney. Options for general registration fees include $125 for the full conference, $100 for Tuesday only, and $25 for Wednesday only. A new option this year, a special session for current high school and college students to learn more about a degree in grassland systems with either a grazing livestock systems option or a grassland ecology and management option. Registration is free for all current full-time high school and college students. For more information, you're encouraged to reach out to Jerry Voleski. You'll find his email at the bottom of your screen, and we'll share a direct link to register for the event along with this story on the Market Journal homepage.
Well, speaking of grazing and livestock, this week we've seen a rise in outdoor temperatures. Keeping your herd cool and comfortable during these hot summer months can be a significant challenge. One of the biggest components of keeping your cattle healthy, though, is maintaining access to fresh water. Market Journal's Mike Straub has this story.
Water quantity and quality is essential to cattle's health and performance. Hot weather and drought conditions can impact both quality and quantity for cattle. Water needs are influenced by several environmental factors: temperature, class of livestock, weight, and stage of production.
We know that water is extremely important to all mammals, and cattle fall into that category, of course. And as we think about getting hot in the summer, we know that cattle need more water. So once we start seeing these high temperatures, we really have to think about, do we have enough water to meet our cattle's requirements? And of course, the general rule of thumb that we always talk about is growing cattle and lactating cattle need at least 2 gallons of water per every 100 pounds of body weight when we hit this 90 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. So we have to keep that in mind. And the other thing we have to think about is that bigger cattle need more water, of course, and whatever stage of production they are in is going to affect the amount of water that they need. When we start getting these hotter days and we have higher humidity, that's always going to compound the fact that cattle need more water to help not only to meet their requirements, but it also helps them to cool off. So you need to make sure that if you have a windmill, for instance, has the wind been blowing? Do you have enough water? And if you think you're going to be stressed for water, how are you going to supplement that water? What are you going to do? The same as if you're in a feed yard, for instance, and it's getting hot. Do you have enough water to meet those requirements? Are your tanks big enough so cattle can get a drink? What are you going to do to alleviate some of that heat or water stress?
While ponds and dams are often the most questionable in quality, the water in tanks and troughs may also need to be tested. Nitrates, sulfates, and blue-green algae can affect water quality. Stagnant water, lakes, and ponds are ideal environments for growth of blue-green algae, which can be toxic to cattle.
So as we think about water quality, nitrates is a concern in some parts of the state. So if we know we have high nitrates in our water, we need to be thinking about that. We want our nitrates to be less than 100 parts per million for our cattle in our water. And keep in mind too that if we're feeding a feed or a forage that is high in nitrates, that's going to compound the issue as well. So the other thing we have to think about are sulfates in our water. Some parts of the state here in Nebraska have high sulfur in the water, and we want our sulfates to be less than 500 parts per million for growing cattle and less than 1,000 parts per million for mature cattle. Now, the final thing we have to think about on top of all of this is if we're feeding from or getting our water from a pond or from a dugout, we need to be concerned about blue-green algae. And of course, blue-green algae will grow better if there are nutrients in the water. And so we have to be concerned about that because we don't want that toxicity affecting our cattle as they're drinking water. Nitrate problems in cattle. So what nitrates do, they get converted to nitrates in the cow's rumen, and that will bind to hemoglobin. So they don't have as much oxygen in their blood as they need. And that will cause issues. And then for blue-green algae, if you're walking around, say the pond, for instance, and you notice there's dead frogs and snakes around there, that is going to tell you that that's probably toxic and you need to really be concerned about that. But some of the signs you'll see in cattle could be diarrhea, vomiting, lack of coordination, labored breathing, seizures, convulsions, and worst case scenario, of course, would be death on cattle.
There are several items that affect water quality. Producers should adopt management practices that do not negatively impact water quality. Monitoring water quality is a way to manage risk. Knowing if there is a problem before symptoms show up in the cow herd is the best way to prevent losses to cattle performance or death. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
To learn more about water quality and testing, we invite you to visit the robust website for all things beef from the university. It is beef.unl.edu. I mentioned this at the top of the show. U.S. Department of Agriculture recently released the latest cattle on feed report. Now, that report showed that heifer retention is not yet increasing, delaying the much anticipated rebuilding of the herd. Our focus of the markets this week is on the livestock complex, and joining the show was UNL Livestock Analyst Elliott Dennis.
Yeah, really it was the marketings that really kind of kept things in line, about 92%. Everything else was a little bit lower than pre-report estimates, such as like July 1 cattle on feed. People thought it was going to be a little bit higher than it was, came out a little bit lower. But here in Nebraska, we haven't seen huge movements because a lot of those places where it pulled it down lower were from smaller states, with the exception of kind of Colorado. But like Texas, Nebraska, we were at 103% of last year's. And so that's why we didn't see a huge amount of movement. More of the conversation has really been shifting towards the percentage of steer heifer mix. Really, it's still at a higher level, around that 38, 39%. And so really kind of leading to, comments of, we're not having herd rebuilding, and kind of leads into, that importance of that July report that we normally get.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. You're talking about the July inventory report. We get that report twice a year, once in January, the other in July. But USDA this year, due to budget cuts, I understand, so they're not publishing that. Shed a light on that topic for us.
Yeah, so this really came about in April, saying that we're not going to publish this. So they did give the industry some kind of, preview of what wasn't going to happen. But really, the July inventory report is really important because it gives us kind of state by state, and really it's our first look at calf crop. So this kind of gives our spring report of where the calf crop is, and really allows us to do things like, beef heifer replacement and, stocker inventory and stocker intensities. And so what is that rate or number of cattle outside of feed yards? That kind of gives us a buffer. That's the big thing that's going to be that goes away. And even in the January report, we know that the number of states is going to go down from 50 to 31. So kind of that coverage of where we're at in the U.S. is going to go down, and really leads us to, as economists and people in the industry, we have to start making assumptions. But they have come on and off with this report sometimes, so the hope is that, if there's enough kind of industry involvement that, we'll come back on again.
Well, let's talk broadly about cattle prices. We look at the live and feeder cattle markets on the board, but also what's getting a lot of attention right now is the video auctions and some of the hot prices we're seeing out there.
Yeah, so really on the live cattle side, as you mentioned, the cattle on feed report was pretty uneventful. We saw things kind of trade up and down $1, but really in that October market, we're trading in that 182 to 187. The December market and the February market were a little bit higher. That that upper range is at the 191, 194, but really kind of what we're thinking is what is going to move that market higher, right? So there all has to be, some sort of combination between consumer demand pulling that up or some supply favoring those prices to go a little bit higher. But Labor Day is our last big day of the month or of the summer, so we'll kind of see where that's at. And, as we know, school starts in a couple weeks for most of the U.S., about 3 weeks, so definitely going to be a reduced kind of demand there. But really the feeder cattle market is kind of where all that leverage is at. And we're talking about, in Nebraska here, we're talking about basis level is at plus 80, plus 90, which is really crazy. And we talked about the video markets, we're at the for weaned, non-programmed cattle, we're anywhere for fall delivery of this year, we're at anywhere between 320 and 340. So if we add that to where we're at in that October-November contract, we're at, plus 80 or plus 50 to plus 80 basis. So we could see 340 prices going into the fall cash prices. And really what we're looking for is that futures is going to probably come up to meet the cash. So that basis is going to narrow, but I'm expecting kind of in that, 320 to 340 range as well for the cash price in October.
Kind of historic times as we continue to highlight the cattle industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Something caught my attention that I wanted to ask you has to do with box beef prices, in particular choice, lost $8 last week as we look at how that finished. What does that tell you about the demand situation?
Yeah, I think you got to put it in perspective. When we look at the index, the choice index, we were already breaking basically seasonal trends. We should have been going down. Instead, we were going up. So I view these kind of sharp corrections down as more just starting to come in line with more we were at in kind of the seasonal projections. And then really what's been carrying, a lot of this, market has been the 90% lean. I mean, we are skyrocketing at that $3.50 on 90% lean. So some of these middleweights have been kind of struggling, but really lean product or ground beef has really shown continued high demand, and that's what's been pulling up a lot of the cutter cow prices and why we haven't seen a lot of herd rebuilding, because there's a lot of value and people are trying to recapture that value of just poor prices and poor markets over the last couple of years.
Okay, just about 30 seconds left here. As you continue to look at maybe the quarter ahead when it comes to the cattle industry, what are maybe one or two of the factors you're keeping a close eye on?
Yeah, I'm still looking at the coal slaughter, because that is going to be our primary driver. That's the way that we actually get, feeder cattle born into next year. So that's the number one thing I'm looking at as we go into the fall, especially with higher 90% lean and a lot of people just trying to retain value in the market.
Always nice to catch up with Elliott. Thanks again to him for taking the time to visit with us this week. We'll be back talking about the grain markets next week, and Doug Simon will join the program. For the first time in a long time, visitors to Husker Harvest Days coming up in Grand Island this year can get complimentary admission tickets. Farm Progress is offering those free tickets to the show for those visitors who will register online at huskerharvestdays.com. Those who do not wish to register in advance can still enter, as always, with the entry fee. Student admission for ages 13 to 17 is still $10, but students can receive complimentary admission by donating 5 non-perishable food items for the food drive. Ages 12 and under are free to attend. You can learn more about your opportunity to gain that free admission to Husker Harvest Days this year in the July issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is that time of the show now where we check in with Eric Hunt, Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist. Eric, most of us had a pretty mild weekend last week, but the temperatures certainly have been on the rise throughout the week. How are things shaping up as we turn to the week ahead?
Well, thanks, Bryce. As of earlier this week, it actually had a pretty cool July across most of the state and a lot of the region, with a below average number of heat stress days across most of this part of the country. So that's actually good news. The bad news is the heat's already started. It's going to continue through most of this next week, with temperatures being at least 4, probably 8 degrees above average statewide through this next week. And that will continue through early August. Of more immediate interest, though, was a short wave moving into the northern plains that will give the eastern third to half of the state at least a chance of precipitation on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. So some places may actually pick up some beneficial precipitation on Sunday night, which would be good news going into this next week. The heat will be on, though, as this ridge starts to build across the southern and south central U.S. The warmest temperatures will be just a bit displaced north of that ridge. And Wednesday, maybe even Thursday, will be our warmest days of the week. In terms of heat indexes, we will probably see heat indices at least 100, probably 105, even 110, 115 for a couple of days here across portions of eastern Nebraska. A bit less of western Nebraska, where we'll have less humidity, but air temperatures will likely be at least in the mid to upper 90s, if not in the lower 100s across the western portion of the state. If there is any good news, there will be some chances of thunderstorms maybe Wednesday night and maybe again some other evenings during the week as we get some storms maybe possible around this ridge. That chance will be better in Iowa and Illinois and Indiana, but there will be some chances for that in portions of Nebraska as well. By later in the week, we should see this ridge move off toward the west, and we will see a cold front move through the state that should drop temperatures back a little bit, hopefully at least the lower 90s, possibly even the mid to upper 80s across portions of northeastern and east central Nebraska as we head toward the weekend. In terms of precipitation, again, the western third of the state, very, very good probability of not picking up a half inch of moisture this week. The only part of the state that has any realistic chance to pick up an inch of rain would be some areas in the east. And again, I wouldn't count on getting an inch of rain this week in the east, but it is at least possible. Temperatures likely to be well above average across basically the entire country, since the jet stream will be paying Santa a visit as we hit the first portion of August. The CPC does have our entire state and most of the region under a risk for excessive heat through the first week of August. And in yellow, they've highlighted areas where they are concerned about rapid drought development. I also share that concern. The European model is also in good agreement, and is the GFS in terms of this heat. In terms of precipitation, the CPC through the first week of August keeps it below average for the entire state and a lot of the region. And this is agreed upon by both the European model and the GFS. This might be a little pessimistic on precipitation, but don't count on picking up a lot of precipitation in the next 2 weeks. We did pick up some beneficial precipitation across portions of Knox and Cedar counties, also Lupin Valley down toward Webster counties this week, and even some beneficial showers out in the Panhandle and in portions of eastern Nebraska where we hadn't had much rain for a couple of weeks. In terms of 90-day precipitation, a little bit drier, sneaky drier across portions of northeastern Nebraska, west central, and certainly a Panhandle, and still a little bit dry, at least the last 3 months across portions of southern Nebraska. In terms of soil moisture, we have really taken off some of that reserve we worked up with earlier this year across portions of eastern Nebraska. Things definitely going the wrong direction across the Kansas border. We do have some additional southern corn rust report after last week. And we have seen addition of a severe drought across portions of the Panhandle and addition of moderate drought across portions of southwestern Nebraska. Stressed rangelands, crop conditions, generally speaking, pretty good shape across most of the Corn Belt. Soil temperatures mostly in the mid-70s to lower 80s. Thanks, and back to you, Bryce.
Alrighty, thank you very much for that update, Eric. We appreciate it. Moving on, as of July 19th, southern rust has been confirmed in several Nebraska counties. With this disease developing earlier than usual and spreading further north than typical, producers in central and eastern portions of the state should be on high alert and scouting their fields. Market Journal producer Bill Dodd had the opportunity to get the latest information from Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Tamra Jackson-Ziems.
Common rust that we could shoot behind us here on this other leaf. This week I want to make everyone aware that we have confirmed southern rust moved into Nebraska now. And at the time of taping here, we have confirmed it in about a dozen different counties in the extreme eastern third of Nebraska. And so I encourage everyone to take a look at the map. That's at the Corn IPM Pipe Southern Rust map. And it'll give you an idea that all of those locations are scattered around that eastern side of the state. Keep in mind as you are looking at that map that counties shaded in red have at least one sample from a cornfield that has had southern rust. It by no means implies that all of the fields in that county are affected. However, you should keep in mind though that the level of infection across that area, or what we call incidence, varies a lot from county to county, and in some areas it's easy to find in the fields there. Otherwise, in other counties it's still very difficult to find. So we're still on the front end or the edge of what this could be for us in a few weeks. Over time, as we look at the weather forecast, which at this point looks quite favorable with high relative humidity, still having some rainfall events, and also we're seeing temperatures averaging between about 75 to 85, which is about perfect for the southern rust fungus. We'll continue to see disease increase in severity in the affected fields, and it will continue to move because these spores produced by the fungus travel long distances on the wind. Our most important message today is that you don't know if you have southern rust until you get out and scout some of these cornfields. And when you're out in the cornfields, there's a few things to look for. Rust diseases, especially southern rust, are going to produce orange or tan pustules on that top leaf surface primarily. And in fact, those orange spores may rub off on your fingers because they're very much like dust. Keep in mind though, we also have common rust. Often that will also be on the bottom of the leaf. Sometimes the color differs a little bit. It may be darker, more like a dark brown or cinnamon color. But it's important to note which one you have because we aren't concerned about common rust because we have natural resistance to that disease. If you need help identifying southern rust or any other disease like tar spot that is active in the state right now too, please submit a sample to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic or reach out to your local county extension educator for help. We do have management options for southern rust if you need to do so, and so fortunately we have a number of commercially available foliar fungicides that do a very good job of controlling southern rust and tar spot, the other disease that's active in the state right now. If you're interested in looking at what those options are and how well they have performed in research-evaluated tests, check out the Crop Protection Network for corn fungicide efficacy, and check out the publication on the Crop Protection Network that shows tables of all of the diseases and the commercially available fungicides and how they performed in controlling them. This year here in Nebraska, there are some risk factors that I want to point out. In particular, it is unusually early to see this much southern rust, especially this far north in the state. And so a lot of people may not be expecting it yet, especially in the northeast part of the state where we're already beginning to see it, and we rarely see it. In addition, we have high risk factors for other fields, such as those that have maybe were planted late in that wide planting date range that we've got right now, or replanted due to some of the water damage and some of the earlier storms. The corn in those fields will be earlier in maturity and more vulnerable to losses later on in the season, and so it may be important to continue to scout those areas and provide protection for them with a fungicide if needed.
Thanks to Tamra for that information this week. Southern rust, of course, a very concerning problem for corn producers around the state. Be sure you're keeping up to date with the latest developments by visiting cropwatch.unl.edu. That is going to do it for this week's edition of Market Journal. As always, we invite you to follow along with the Market Journal team on social media, as well as by subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's where you can join in on the conversation. Hope to see you back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.